Well, as we've seen throughout the Biden administration, we've got the mishandling of the southern border. And, we see this repeatedly. The left will ignore the law to orchestrate their desired political outcomes. And this applies to more than just public health policy and the border. I mean, since taking power, the Biden administration has adopted what they call a whole-of-government approach to certain issues, leading federal agencies to impose regulations beyond their authority. And, of course, they have to be challenged in the courts. Now, we saw this when the Department of Education threatened to withhold school lunch money from poor students attending Christian schools. We saw it when the Federal Highway Administration finalized a rule requiring states to create benchmarks for greenhouse gas reduction. I mean, how can this federal executive overreach be reined in? Well, join me now to discuss this is Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. General Yost, welcome back to Washington Watch and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. It's good to see you.
Well, good to see you as well. And you've been on the front lines of this. We've talked about this before, how the attorneys generals of the states have really been taking on the federal government under the Biden administration with this whole of government approach where they're overstepping their bounds, but they're doing it regardless of what the law says. How do we stop this?
Well, we have to rely on the genius of the founders, the separation of powers. The courts and Congress both have the ability to rein in an overreaching executive. Congress hasn't been too interested in doing that of late, but fortunately, in a lot of places, courts are doing their jobs as attorneys general are going to court and challenging these things.
Let's talk about some of these some of these abuses. Now, one that you were quite involved in, and we were just talking earlier in the program about what's been happening at our southern border and what's been happening with diseases that are coming in and how COVID-19, they overreached and how we're really kind of almost setting the stage for another massive government overreach. You've addressed these in the past, but it seems like even in some cases they ignore what the courts say.
Well, it's true. And one of the things people ought to pay attention to is the phrase whole of government. You're starting to hear this from bureaucrats and politicians in Washington over and over again. That should be a red flag for you. When you hear whole of government, what that means, it's kind of a code that they're going to use agencies that have absolutely nothing to do with the thing at hand to try to accomplish something that they don't have authority to do. For example, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, it's out there to regulate the stock markets and stock trading and commodities trading. And they publish rules, and it's a regulatory agency, pretty dry and dusty. Well, under the whole of government approach, the Biden administration is using them to try to enter into fossil fuels and energy policy and climate change. What does the SEC and stock markets have to do with whether we drive electric cars or not, or fossil fuel development, hydrocarbon development? That's an example. Another one, and we won this in the Supreme Court, they tried to get OSHA involved in the COVID wars. Mm-hmm. OSHA is all about, let's have guardrails around the catwalks. Let's make sure that there's safety features around the vats of acid so that workers don't get hurt. They tried to use that department and that authority to make sure that every employee of a company that had more than 100 employees, which is over 80 million Americans, had to have the vaccine, had to take the jab if they wanted the government's permission to work. The Supreme Court knocked it down and said, that doesn't work, but it's that whole of government mindset where they try to take every bureaucratic alphabet soup agency to do something it was never designed to do.
So, General, they know going into this that most of what they're doing is it's beyond the limit of beyond the scope of their authority, but they know that it's going to take months, maybe years for the courts to decide some of these things. So they go anyway and they do it. Congress, as you said, number one, it's split. You got the Democrats controlling the Senate, the Republicans barely having control of the House. This really puts a spotlight on the role of the Attorney General of states all across this nation as being on the front lines of what now has become a legal battle to uphold the law.
And that's why it's so important to keep a watch on Washington. And we have to realize we're in a battle. This is not a civil debate, a schoolhouse rock kind of civics lesson here. These folks don't care about the norms. They don't care about the rules or the rule of law. We are in a pitched battle, and we need everybody to help.
Well, we've got to be informed. We've got to be voting. We've got to be engaged, making sure that we have those that respect the rule of law, because our system doesn't work without that. Attorney General Yost, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Always great to see you, and keep up the great work in the Buckeye State.